So an 80s cult classic is getting a sequel decades after the original came out. So, well, we've seen it be good and we've seen it be that. Beetlejuice Beetlejuice. Now, Beetlejuice Beetlejuice, or I'm just going to call it Beetlejuice 2 for the sake of simplicity, because saying Beetlejuice Beetlejuice over and over again in this video is going to get very tedious, so I'm just going to call it Beetlejuice 2. But Beetlejuice 2 is the long-awaited sequel from the 1988 Tim Burton classic Beetlejuice. And just to refresh you guys on my thoughts on the original Beetlejuice, I think it's a lot of fun. It's a pretty entertaining dark comedy with a lot of Tim Burton imagery and special effects and all the stuff that really cemented Tim Burton's style in the late 80s going into the 90s. And it's definitely a movie that is more style over substance. So if you like really out there creative visuals, a really creative take on the afterlife with a lot of very out there character designs, creature effects, stop motion special effects, practical special effects, it's all there in the original Beetlejuice. Although it's a very self-contained, pretty simple story, and yeah, it is funny. This is a comedy more than anything else, and Beetlejuice 2 is more or less the same of what you got in the original Beetlejuice. It feels very consistent with the original, just bringing back almost the entire cast. You have Winona Ryder and Catherine O'Hara both returning as Lydia and Delia Deetz, and they both fill their roles perfectly in this movie. They feel like they are an aged up version of the characters that we left off in the first movie. And Delia Deetz, for whatever reason, made me laugh so much in this movie because she is exactly what you thought Delia would be like at the end of the first movie, just aged up a few years, because she's still very much that same character. She's that manic artist that I'm pretty sure Tim Burton identifies with. But now she's actually found some success with her sculpture and her art, and same thing with Lydia. She's running a successful cable paranormal show. So the Deetzes are actually doing pretty well for themselves, except for Lydia's relationship with her daughter, because her daughter, played by Jenna Ortega, who just feels like she was born to be in this kind of Beetlejuice world. She fits right in. She's likable, and it doesn't come off as lazy casting. She actually brings a decent amount of character and personality to this role that I honestly wasn't really expecting after seeing Wednesday. I thought she'd just be playing Wednesday again, but no, this is a bit of a different character. She doesn't believe in ghosts. She thinks her mom is a fraud, and that's actually something that this movie explores in great detail. These different characters, old and new, are coming to grips with Beetlejuice himself, but also the reality of the afterlife, because in Beetlejuice the afterlife is so random. There's so many different rules. It's hyper specific in some areas and then incredibly vague in other areas. So this movie really gets a chance to explore a lot more of that. I was very excited for that, because what I wanted out of this movie was, for one, it to be a throwback to the old school Tim Burton style, the old school stop motion where there was a lot of practical effects, a lot of just off the walls creativity. And on top of that, I wanted just a lot of dark humor having to do with the afterlife, a lot of good jokes, a lot of surreal imagery, a lot of just crazy out there concepts that probably wouldn't work in the hands of any other director. But with Tim Burton, he knows how to incorporate these very outlandish ideas and make it work. And thankfully, this movie does accomplish both of those things. There's a lot of practical effects in here. There is some CGI, which you kind of know going in, okay, there's going to be some CGI for some of these effects. But really, the CGI is either used to enhance an already existing practical effect, or to do something that just cannot be done practically, like seeing Monica Bellucci piece herself together on camera. Like, that just needs to be at least partially CGI until she gets all of her staples in, and then it goes back to being a practical makeup effect. But really, about, I don't know, 75% of the effects in here are practical. There's a lot of animatronics, there's a lot of practical makeup effects, especially in the underworld, in the waiting room. You see a lot more examples of dead people. That was one of the most creative things about the original Beetlejuice, is seeing how different people died and how they look in the afterlife based on how they died. And this movie just goes the extra mile with that. We see a lot more of that kind of character design, and they don't really reuse a lot of the same ideas from the original. Sure, you get the shrunken head guys that were in the original, but even then, those were executed in a very different way than it was in the original. And in the waiting room, you just have a whole bunch of brand new faces, brand new things to look at and pick apart. And really, the longer you look at these character designs, the funnier they get, because you start noticing little details in the makeup that just tell the story of how this person died, and it just keeps getting getting funnier the longer they're on screen. But of course, we gotta talk about the star of the show himself, Michael Keaton, returning as Beetlejuice. And this movie marks the second time in recent memory where Michael Keaton has returned to play a Tim Burton character in his older age, the first being Batman and Bruce Wayne in the Flash movie, and here it's Beetlejuice, and I feel like him returning as Beetlejuice feels a lot more natural and a lot less distracting than him returning as Batman in the Flash. Because in the Flash, he's clearly a lot older. They didn't really hide that fact. They kind of leaned into it, but then when he suits up and tries to be that classic Tim Burton Batman again, you just don't buy it because of his age. Here with Beetlejuice, he is covered in so much makeup and prosthetics, and he's got so much energy, and that voice is back, and you immediately buy him as the same character that he played in 1988, because just something about the makeup, it made him look a bit younger. You can still tell that he's older Michael Keaton, but it's not nearly as distracting, and he just puts so much energy into this performance like he did in the original. It's so fast-paced, it's so out there, bonkers, bouncing off the walls, quick cuts, quick delivery, that you don't feel like he's missed a beat. He still has that youthful energy that he had in the original, and it was just a blast to see him back. He's got some great lines, he's got some great moments of surreal, weird imagery, and I honestly forgot just how funny the character of Beetlejuice is, because I've seen the original Beetlejuice so many times. All the jokes I kind of have memorized, or I can see coming a mile away, and I do think that that original movie is pretty funny, but it doesn't make me laugh out loud anymore because I know all those jokes and I know what's coming. But with this movie, I had no idea what was coming, so when Beetlejuice does or says something that's just right out of left field, it had me crack it up. And there's a lot of moments like that, not just with Beetlejuice, but with some of the human characters, just the throwaway dialogue that they'll throw out, that kind of mean-spirited Tim Burton humor that was definitely in the original Beetlejuice, but you do see a bit more in like Edward Scissorhands and Sleepy Hollow and some of his other work. It's all here, and it's probably the loudest and most frequently I've laughed in the movie theater in a while. But in all fairness, this movie is not nearly as streamlined and focused as the original was, because the actual plot is kind of all over the place. There's a lot of different subplots and a lot of different characters that we follow back and forth, and I ultimately think it's balanced out pretty well, and by the end, it does all come together in a pretty satisfying finale. So I can't really fault the movie for being a little convoluted, and especially when you focus more on the afterlife and the rules of the afterlife and explored a lot more, and I feel like how they explored it was a really interesting way to do it. I just can't help but feel like the movie's trying to juggle one or two too many things, but at the same time, I don't really mind it because ultimately it does wrap up in a satisfying way, but also because the different things that you're seeing are all super creative and original, and honestly, we haven't seen a lot of this out there originality from Tim Burton in a while, and I was so glad to see it here because it proves that the dude still got it. Whatever magic was floating around in the late 80s and early 90s with Tim Burton that has kind of been squashed by the studio system over the years and his own nostalgia for properties that he probably shouldn't be remaking. When you just turn the man loose on a property that really begs for that kind of style, he's still got it and he will deliver. But the last thing I want to touch on before I wrap this up is that this movie is definitely not a kid's movie or a family movie. And really, the original Beetlejuice is not a family movie either because, I mean, there's a lot of crude humor, there's a lot of body horror, there's a lot of dark imagery and some nightmare fuel in that first movie, but I feel like because it got played on TV a lot, especially around Halloween, and it is rated PG in a time before PG-13 was really codified, that still doesn't change the fact that Beetlejuice himself is not a kid-friendly character, and I was so happy to see that that same spirit is still in this movie. They didn't try to water him down, they didn't try to sanitize it, they didn't try to make it kid-friendly or give it a PG rating like the original had. No, this is PG-13. There's nothing that out there or that profane that would really crank this up to a hard R rating. It still has that kind of whimsical feel that the original had. But when I was in the theater, I did see a lot of families with young kids going to see this movie. And after about the halfway point, when we start getting into a lot of the classic Beetlejuice body horror and kind of scary moments, I couldn't help but feel like some of these parents might have made a mistake bringing these kids into the theater. Because not only does this movie deal with the undead and people dying in incredibly gruesome ways, in true Tim Burton fashion, there is a good deal of just classic wacky nightmare fuel body horror elements. Stuff that honestly reminded me of American Werewolf in London. So yeah, I definitely say parental guidance is suggested. Tim Burton doesn't really pull his punches in this movie. This is just as weird and gross and disturbing and just outlandish as the original movie was, and honestly, I loved every minute of it because when it got weird and it got creative, I was just taken back to what I love about Tim Burton and his style. And even though I don't love all of his movies, when he goes all out on these visuals, it works for me. But now I turn it over to you guys. What do you think about Beetlejuice Beetlejuice? Whatever you think, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And as always, I'm Colby. This is my nerdy talk, and I'll see you in the next video.